Hey guys, tonight we step into the shadowy, cold halls of the Tudor court, where whispers of scandal and betrayal have always hung heavy in the air. Imagine the smell of damp stone, the flicker of torchlight, and the hum of gossip that fills the royal chambers. But this time, the whispers are about a young woman, Catherine Howard, who finds herself trapped in the golden cage of royal life, a life that will ultimately lead her to a tragic fate. You probably won't survive this one without a few shivers down your spine, but don't worry, it's history. And it's nothing if not full of surprises just when you think you know where it's headed. Bam, another twist. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, feel free to post your location and local time. I'm always curious about where these stories are reaching. Just now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Catherine Howard wasn't born into the kind of life you'd expect for a future queen. Born in 1523, she came from a relatively minor noble family. The Howard name was well respected, but they weren't exactly rolling in wealth. Her father, Lord Edmund Howard, wasn't the most stable of figures, often in and out of financial trouble. Yet, Catherine's beauty and charm were undeniable, and it didn't take long for her to be noticed. As a young woman, Catherine caught the eye of the influential and politically connected family members around her. She was sent to court at the age of about 16 to live in the household of her aunt, the Duchess of Norfolk. Catherine's flirtations and charm quickly caught the attention of the royal court. But it was Henry VIII, who was already an aging monarch, desperate for love and companionship, who was most captivated by her. Historians still argue whether Catherine truly understood what was at stake in her relationship with Henry. Was she just an innocent, naive girl swept up in the whirlwind of royal life? Or was she calculating enough to pursue the most powerful man in the country? Either way, she was about to step into a world where every move would be scrutinized. Catherine Howard was young, lively, and beautiful. Everything Henry craved at that point in his life. He had already been through 4 wives, each with her own fate, and was now on his 5th. His previous marriages had ended in various ways: divorce, death, and the political upheaval that followed. Catherine, unlike his other wives, was different. She was young, passionate, and full of life, an antidote to the loneliness and disappointment Henry had experienced in his later years. But there was more to Catherine's story than just youthful charm. Beneath the surface of her beauty, Catherine was also carrying a secret one that would unravel her life in the most tragic way imaginable. But before we delve into that, let's take a moment to consider the gravity of Catherine's rise. In a court where every move could be fatal, Catherine's ascent from the halls of a minor noble family to the throne beside one of England's most infamous kings is a testament to the complex world of Tudor politics. As you watch Catherine Howard walk into the grand, echoing halls of the palace, the weight of her new life settles in. One moment, she's just a young woman from a family of modest means, and the next, she's Queen of England, 5th wife to a man whose reputation for ruthlessness is already legendary. Her life, once filled with playful flirtations, now carries the burden of being the king's chosen queen, the excitement and joy of being crowned. However, will soon be overshadowed by the crushing pressure that comes with the title. Before we dive deeper into her royal life, make sure you've liked and subscribed if you're enjoying this journey. And, as always, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious to know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights again, settle into your chair, and let's continue Catherine's story. The pressure on her is immense, and you can feel the weight of it as you walk beside her. She is Henry's 5th wife, and his need for a son still gnaws at him. Despite his love for Catherine's youth and beauty, His obsession with having a male heir defined every aspect of their marriage. The marriage itself was quick. Catherine and Henry wed in 1540, only a month after Henry's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, had been unceremoniously divorced. It wasn't exactly a romantic courtship, and it certainly wasn't based on any deep emotional connection. Henry was drawn to Catherine's youthful exuberance, her beauty, and her charm. At 17, Catherine was nearly half Henry's age, and though he may have seen her as the answer to his search for a loving companion, the political undertones of their marriage were unmistakable. The Howards, Catherine's family, were eager to align themselves with Henry, and they pushed Catherine into the marriage, fully aware of the opportunities it could provide. Historians still argue whether Catherine ever truly loved Henry, or if she saw him more as a stepping stone to power and security. Some believe that she, too, fell for the allure of royal life and the attention that came with being the king's queen. Others argue that Catherine, naive and inexperienced, was simply swept along by the grand spectacle of the court. Either way, the relationship between Catherine and Henry was never going to be simple, especially given Henry's volatile nature. Henry VIII was, by this point, a very different man from the youthful, charismatic king he had once been. He had suffered injuries, became obese, and was plagued by both physical and emotional issues. Catherine, on the other hand, was still very much a girl in the eyes of the court, full of life and vitality. But their age gap wasn't the only thing that set them apart. Henry had a tumultuous history with his wives, each marriage leaving its mark, and in Catherine, he thought he had found someone who would give him the love and companionship he so desperately craved. But as with all things in Henry's world, what seemed perfect on the surface was beginning to unravel beneath. As the new queen, Catherine was expected to play her part to be the embodiment of grace and dignity, fulfilling the role of consort to a king who demanded loyalty, respect, and obedience. But Catherine had her own past, and secrets, as many others before her did, would eventually come to light. She was no stranger to the attentions of men before her marriage to Henry. In fact, Catherine's youthful indiscretions would prove to be her undoing. But what Catherine didn't anticipate was the immense scrutiny and control she would face in her new life. The court that once welcomed her with open arms was now keenly observing every move she made. Every glance, every whisper was being watched, and with every passing day, the once carefree young woman began to realise the gravity of her position. Being the Queen of England wasn't just about wearing fine dresses and attending royal feasts. It was about survival in a world of dangerous politics and deadly ambitions. It's hard to imagine the kind of pressure Catherine must have felt as Henry's wife, knowing that any misstep could cost her everything. What was once the thrill of the court now felt like a cage, beautiful, but suffocating. Historians still debate whether Catherine could have done anything to avoid her fate. Was her downfall inevitable, given the pressure placed on her, or was she simply another victim of Henry's unpredictable wrath? You feel the tension in the air, thick with the whispers of the court. The opulent palace, once a place of joy and celebration, now feels like a prison to Catherine Howard. The eyes of the court are on her, and though she smiles at the men who gaze upon her, her heart is heavy with the burden of secrets. Every glance she exchanges, every touch of her hand, could spell her downfall. The once bright energy she exuded is now dimmed by a gnawing anxiety. You can almost hear the rustling of silk gowns, the clinking of jewellery, the muffled voices in the corridors, each whisper feeding into the growing paranoia that surrounds her. Before we continue, remember to like and subscribe if you're following Catherine's tragic journey. Also, let me know where you're watching from. It's always interesting to see where this story travels. Now, dim the lights, let your mind settle, and let's explore the next stage of Catherine's unravelling. The whispers that fill the palace are no longer just idle gossip, they're accusations. and Catherine is about to face the consequences. In the early days of Catherine's marriage to Henry, all appeared perfect. She was young, radiant, and adored by the king. But beneath her beauty and charm lay a past that Henry would eventually uncover. Long before she was crowned queen, Catherine had a history with men flirtations, affairs, and a romantic life that would come to haunt her once she sat on the throne. Historians still argue whether Catherine was truly aware of the potential consequences of her past actions. Was she simply naive, believing that the past could remain hidden, or did she know exactly what she was doing, calculating her actions to secure her position either way? The truth would soon come to light. Catherine's previous relationships, particularly with men like Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper, would become her undoing. While Henry was growing more obsessed with securing a male heir, his attention was shifting toward his young queen, and not in the way Catherine had hoped. As the whispers of her past began to grow louder, it became clear that Catherine's charm and beauty were no longer enough to shield her from the scrutiny of the court and the king's watchful eye. In 1541, accusations surfaced. A member of Catherine's household, who had once been close to her, had spoken of her relationship with Derham before her marriage. Worse still, it was revealed that Catherine had continued her affair with Culpeper even after her marriage to Henry. Her infidelity, though not overtly scandalous in nature, was enough to send ripples through the court and stir Henry's wrath. The man who once saw her as the epitome of youth and beauty now saw only betrayal. The fact that Catherine had a history of promiscuity was not entirely surprising in a court where passion and politics often collided. But the fact that she'd continued the affair even after becoming queen sealed her fate. Historians still debate whether Catherine was truly in love with Culpeper, or if her actions were driven by her own insecurities and desire for companionship in a court where she could never truly be herself. Was it a desperate cry for love? Or an act of foolishness that led her to jeopardize her royal position? Catherine's enemies wasted no time in making sure the rumours about her past and present were heard. Soon, the accusations reached Henry and the king, once so captivated by her, and became consumed by rage and humiliation. To make matters worse, Catherine's actions were considered a direct insult to Henry's authority, and for a man who had already executed 2 of his wives, this betrayal was unforgivable. The moment the charges of adultery were levelled against her, Catherine's fate was sealed. Her arrest was swift. Catherine, once the gleaming queen, was now a prisoner, her beauty and charm stripped away by the cruel light of reality. Her trial was little more than a formality. The charges against her were clear, and there was no room for defence. The court found her guilty of committing adultery, and the king, in his fury, declared that she would be executed. Her fate was sealed by her own hands, guided by the very whispers that had once praised her beauty. Historians still argue whether Catherine truly understood the gravity of her actions. Was she simply a victim of circumstance? Or did her own actions seal her fate? Could she have escaped the death sentence? Or was her life always destined to be a tragic tale of ambition, love, and betrayal? The court that had once celebrated her now turned its back on her, and the whispers that had once been her greatest asset now became her greatest threat. As Catherine awaited her fate, she would have known that the king's wrath was unmatched. The royal court, once a place of lavish celebrations, now felt like a deadly theatre where Catherine's tragic play was unfolding before an audience that had no empathy. The chill of the Tower of London wraps around you like a suffocating cloak, the cold stone walls bearing silent witness to the tragic events unfolding within. Catherine Howard, once the lively and charming queen, now finds herself a prisoner, confined to the very place where countless others had faced their fate. The whispers that had once been her downfall have grown into an undeniable chorus, and now it's time for the inevitable, the trial. You probably won't survive this part without feeling a sense of dread. Catherine's story is tragic, yes, but it's also a harsh reminder of the volatility of power and how quickly it can turn against you. So, before we dive deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these haunting stories from history. And if you've stuck with us so far, share your location and the time of day in the comments. I love hearing where these tales reach. Now, dim the lights once more and let's ease into the grim reality of Catherine Howard's trial and conviction. The walls of the tower seem to close in on her, each stone holding centuries of tragic history. But it's Catherine's turn now. Her trial was a formality, one set in motion by Henry's growing fury. Catherine, though queen, was no longer the young woman who had captured the king's attention with her beauty and charm. Her youth had been overshadowed by her mistakes, and in the unforgiving world of Tudor politics, there was no room for mercy. The charges were clear adultery, and worse, the betrayal of a king who had once adored her. The trial took place in the autumn of 1541, a time when the court was already brimming with tension. Catherine was accused of having maintained her affair with Thomas Culpeper even after her marriage to Henry, as well as of being previously involved with Frances Dereham before her marriage to the king. The accusations were damning, especially considering Henry's own history with his wives. A king who had executed 2 wives before, and who had already broken with the Catholic Church to secure his own desires, wasn't likely to show leniency now. Historians still debate whether Catherine's actions were fueled by youthful folly, or if she was truly a victim of her own naivety. Was she simply acting out of a misguided desire for love or attention? Or was her failure to escape the court's constraints a result of the rigid nature of Tudor life, where every glance, every whisper was watched? Was she too innocent to realise the gravity of her actions? Or was she caught in the web of the royal court, where intrigue and betrayal ran rampant? The trial was held in front of a court full of onlookers, noblemen, advisers, and even the king's own counsellors. There was little doubt about the outcome. Catherine, standing at the centre of the court, faced charges that were impossible to deny. She was stripped of her dignity, and her once promising future as a queen was now reduced to a spectacle. The charges against her were clear, and the court, having no sympathy for her, convicted her without hesitation. What's chilling, though, is how Catherine seemed to accept her fate. Historians still argue whether Catherine understood the extent of her crime or whether she was too young to grasp the deadly consequences of her actions. Was she truly remorseful for her affairs? Or had she simply resigned herself to the inevitable? Regardless of her understanding, the court found her guilty. The verdict was swift, and the sentence death was delivered with little more than a passing thought. Catherine was stripped of her title as queen and moved to the Tower, where she would await her fate. The execution of Catherine Howard is often described as one of the most poignant and tragic moments of Henry VIII's reign. For a man who had once loved her, her demise was not just a matter of personal betrayal, but of public spectacle. Catherine had failed to provide him with the one thing he so desperately wanted: loyalty and fidelity. And in a world where a king's authority was absolute, there could be no room for a queen who failed to live up to those expectations. The trial, though short, was a brutal affair. There was little defence on Catherine's behalf, and no room for her to make excuses. Her actions had already been condemned in the eyes of the court, and the whispers of her past had sealed her fate. As she stood before her judges, her future was already determined. But what's haunting about Catherine's trial is not just the fact that it was unfairly swift. It's the realisation that, like so many others at Henry's court, she was just another pawn in a game of power and politics, where betrayal was commonplace, and loyalty meant everything. For Catherine, the stakes were too high, and her fall too swift. Historians have long debated whether Catherine's actions were the reflection of her character, or if the circumstances of her time and her youth led her to make disastrous decisions. Could she have survived had she been more cautious, or was her fate inevitable? Given the ruthless nature of Henry VIII and the court she had entered, the morning air in the Tower of London is cold. The wind biting as you stand on the execution block, watching Catherine Howard's final moments unfold. You can almost feel the chill deep in your bones. The silence surrounding the execution site broken only by the rustling of the crowd as they wait for the inevitable. The Queen, once full of youthful exuberance and charm, now stands there, awaiting her fate. Her final moments are a brutal reminder of how quickly the whims of power can tear down even the most adored. Before we dive into the final, tragic moments of Catherine's life, remember to like and subscribe if this history has pulled you in. These moments are painful, but they're part of the stories that shaped history. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far this tale reaches. Now, dim the lights again. Let your mind settle. And let's walk through Catherine's execution and the aftermath. The end of her story is here, but its implications would echo for years to come. Catherine Howard's execution, just like that of Anne Boleyn and others before her, was a cold, calculated decision that reflected Henry VIII's refusal to tolerate betrayal. On February 13th, 1542, Catherine was beheaded. It was a fate she had come to accept, though not without signs of fear and regret. She was 19 years old, barely an adult, yet already marked by the choices she had made. Her young life, full of potential and promise, had been shattered by her own actions and the unforgiving nature of the Tudor court. As the executioner raised his axe, the crowd remained silent, a heavy tension hanging in the air. Catherine, stripped of her royal titles and her dignity, was led to the scaffold where her fate awaited. The young queen, once the picture of innocence, now stood before her end, her beauty and charm no match for the harsh realities of the court. She was, in that moment, a tragic figure, a girl who had been caught in the ruthless web of power, politics, and betrayal. Catherine's last words, if she spoke any, are lost to history, but it's said that she expressed remorse for her actions. Whether or not she fully understood the gravity of her mistakes is something historians still argue about. Was she genuinely sorry for her affair with Culpeper, or was she simply resigned to her fate, knowing there was no way out? As the blade fell, Catherine Howard's short life came to a violent and tragic end. The echoes of the axe hitting the block resonated through the tower, and with it, her dreams and ambitions were silenced. The moment was swift, but the impact was far-reaching. Catherine's death marked the end of a young life, but it also marked the end of the Tudor dynasty's tolerance for failure and betrayal in its queens. The political and personal consequences of Catherine's execution were profound. Her death was yet another stark reminder of the dangers of being a woman in the Tudor court. The price of a queen's mistake was always death. For Henry VIII, it was a clear message. Loyalty was the only thing that mattered. Everything else, beauty, charm, even love was expendable if it meant that the throne was threatened. Catherine's legacy, unfortunately, was one of tragedy, while Anne Boleyn's legacy lived on in her daughter, Elizabeth I. Catherine Howard's name is often overshadowed by the grisly nature of her demise. Yet, her story is important because it shows the brutal nature of the court she inhabited. The power struggles, the betrayal, and the fleeting nature of royal favour all contributed to Catherine's tragic end. Historians still debate the moral of Catherine's story. Was she simply a victim of the system? Or did she contribute to her own downfall through her reckless actions? Could she have survived had she been more cautious? Or was her fate sealed from the moment she entered the royal court? where the lines between love, power, and betrayal were drawn in blood. In the aftermath of Catherine's death, the royal court continued, moving on as it always did. The focus shifted to Henry's next marriage, and the people of England, though saddened by Catherine's death, quickly moved on to the next chapter in the tumultuous reign of Henry VIII. But for Catherine, there would be no more chapters, only a legacy defined by youthful folly, betrayal, and an execution that sealed her place in history. As the years passed, Catherine Howard's tragic fate faded into the background of the larger story of Henry VIII and his many marriages. Yet, her death remains a haunting reminder of the dangerous intersection between love, loyalty, and power. In a world where every move was scrutinised and every mistake had dire consequences, Catherine's fate was sealed before she ever realised the gravity of her actions.